Sir, I'm on a public sidewalk. We're
Back
live.
up!
Please don't touch me.
Back up! Back up right now! I'm not asking you again!
I am backing up, but you can't put your hands on the press here.
You're interfering! Move!
Viewers, did you just see that? He shoved me on live
Ridiculous!
television.
The first thing you hear is Danielle Brooks trying to keep her voice calm while everything around her gets louder. "Sir, I'm on a public sidewalk," she says, the kind of steady tone that comes from years of live shots where anything can go wrong. "We're live. Please don't touch me." For half a second, the scene looks like every other breaking news stand-up, flashing lights behind her, a crowd pressed back by yellow tape, a cold wind snapping at her jacket. Then Sergeant Mark Harlan steps into frame like he owns the space between the camera and the street. "Back up, now," he snaps. And he doesn't sound like someone giving a safety instruction. He sounds like someone issuing a punishment. Danielle shifts her feet, measured, deliberate. "I am backing up," she replies. "But you can't put your hands on the press." Harlan's jaw tightens. "You're interfering," he says. And then the shove happens. Quick, casual, like he expects the world to accept it. Danielle stumbles one step, catches herself, and turns her head slightly toward the lens the way reporters do when they want viewers to understand something without saying it outright. "Viewers," she says, and her voice drops into something sharper than anger. Clarity. "Did you just see that? He shoved me on live television." At 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening in Cleveland, what should have been a 10-minute crowd control response outside the Lakeshore Towers apartment complex became a citywide reckoning before the 6 o'clock hour even ended. The call had started like so many others. A report of a disturbance, a building lobby packed with frustrated residents, and a rumor spreading through the crowd that someone might have a weapon. The kind of situation where police arrive hot, adrenaline high, and everyone's patience already gone. Danielle had been on the assignment because she was the station's go-to for fast-moving scenes. 22 years in the field, multiple awards, and a reputation in the newsroom for never sensationalizing what she couldn't prove. She didn't do the breathless, frantic style. She did calm. She did precise. She did the kind of reporting that made officials nervous because she asked questions that didn't come with a grin. She also knew how to survive. Danielle was a black woman in a job that put her in conflict zones without the armor that uniforms provide. She'd learned early that confidence is sometimes the only shield you're allowed to carry. She'd learned how to read a scene, how to keep her hands visible, how to stay on the right side of tape lines, and how to document everything. Names, badge numbers, timestamps, because memory gets questioned and video doesn't. That night, she arrived with Luis, her photographer, 10 minutes after the first units rolled in. Luis was quiet, methodical, the kind of camera operator who framed shots like evidence. Their producer, Maya, was in Danielle's ear through an IFB earpiece, feeding updates, reminding them they were live in 2 minutes, and warning that police were starting to push people farther back. Danielle took a position on the public sidewalk where she could keep the building entrance and the police line in the background without crossing into the taped-off area. She checked her mic, adjusted her scarf against the wind, and took a breath that fogged in the air. She wasn't worried, not exactly. She'd covered protests, fires, shootings, and storms. She'd been shoved before, by crowds, by angry bystanders, even once by an overeager private security guard who thought the word media was a suggestion. But this scene felt different the moment she saw Harlan. Sergeant Mark Harlan wasn't the first officer on the line. He arrived later when the crowd was already restless and the younger officers were visibly trying to hold the perimeter without escalating. Harlan walked like he expected obedience to clear a path in front of him. He was broad-shouldered, mid-40s, clean-shaven, the kind of supervisor who wore authority like a second vest. Danielle recognized him instantly, not from personal interaction, but from the way his name traveled in the city. Not famous, not infamous, but known. The kind of known that gets said in a sentence like, "Watch out for Harlan, he's a hard ass." Danielle had heard that line before. Hard ass is sometimes a polite word people use when they mean volatile. Maya's voice clicked in Danielle's ear. "You're up in 5, she said. "Keep it tight. Police are saying possible weapon. We need the latest." Danielle nodded, even though Maya couldn't see her. She looked into the lens and began, "Good evening. This is Danielle Brooks, live at Lakeshore Towers, where police responded to reports of..." She didn't get to finish. Harlan stepped forward, eyes on the camera like it was an insult. "Move back," he ordered, and he pointed not at the crowd, not at the tape, but at Danielle. "Move back now." Danielle raised one hand slightly, palm open, showing she wasn't holding anything but her mic. "Sergeant," she said, "still live, still calm. I'm on the sidewalk. We're behind the tape. We're not interfering." Harlan's stare flicked to Luisha's camera, then back to Danielle. I said move, he repeated, and now his voice had that edge, an impatience that didn't match the situation. Danielle took one step back anyway because compliance with a lawful order is one thing, and feeding someone's ego is another, and she didn't yet know which one this was. Am I being directed to a specific location? She asked. Where would you like the media to stand? It was a reasonable question, and that's what made the moment dangerous, because Harlan didn't answer it. He closed the distance instead. You're interfering, he said again, louder, as if volume could turn a claim into a fact. Danielle's heart didn't race with panic. It raced with recognition. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. Danielle kept her feet planted. Sergeant, she said, I'm requesting clarification. We're live. I need to know where you want us. Luis's camera stayed steady, but Danielle could feel the tension in his posture. Camera guys learn to anticipate impact the same way goalies anticipate shots. Harlan's hand came up, and for a fraction of a second, Danielle thought he was going to gesture. Instead, his palm hit her upper arm and pushed. Not hard enough to knock her down, not gentle enough to be accidental, just enough to humiliate, just enough to send a message. Danielle stumbled one step, caught herself, and the entire broadcast shifted. There are moments on live television when everyone watching can feel the air change, even through a screen. This was one of those moments. Danielle turned toward the camera and narrated reality the way she'd been trained to do. Viewers, she said, you just watched a police sergeant put his hands on me while we were standing on a public sidewalk. In her ear, Maya's voice was suddenly tight. Danielle, are you okay? Danielle didn't look down. She didn't look away. She didn't give the moment to anyone else. I'm okay, she answered, still to camera. But I want to be clear. I am not resisting. I am not crossing the police line. I am asking where the media is permitted to stand. Harlan's face tightened in the way people's faces do when they realize they're being seen. For the first time, he glanced up and down the street. Not at the crowd, but at the phones. Because the crowd had phones out now. People always record police, but on nights like this, recording becomes contagious. A shove in person is one thing. A shove on live TV is a different animal. Harlan leaned in like he could intimidate the microphone itself. You need to leave, he said. Danielle's voice stayed level. Am I being detained? She asked. Am I free to go? Her words were calm, but they were also precise, not combative, procedural. That question hit Harlan like a slap, because it forced him to choose between lawful action and unlawful impulse. If he said she was detained, he needed a reason. If he said she was free to go, he had no reason to keep threatening her. Danielle watched him weigh it in real time. Quick question for you watching, Danielle continued, because she knew her audience and she knew how to keep them. Should a police officer be allowed to physically move a reporter who is standing on a public sidewalk during a live broadcast without giving a clear, lawful order? Drop a comment below, because we're going to show you exactly what's happening as it happens. Harlan's radio crackled. Another voice, another supervisor, asked for an update on perimeter control. Harlan didn't respond right away. He looked at Danielle again, and for a moment it seemed like he might do something worse just to reclaim dominance. That's when a younger officer, Officer Keenan, stepped into frame from the side. He didn't block Harlan, not exactly. He just positioned himself in a way that changed the geometry. Sergeant, he said quietly, media's allowed on the sidewalk. We just need them behind the tape. Danielle is behind the tape. It was the first time someone had spoken to Harlan like a co-worker instead of a subordinate. Harlan's eyes flicked to Keenan, and you could see annoyance, but you could also see calculation. He was being watched, not by one camera, by hundreds. Danielle continued her report, threading the needle between journalism and self-defense. Police are still investigating reports of a disturbance inside the building, she said. Witnesses here tell us there was an argument in the lobby, and police are asking residents to remain inside their units. We do want to emphasize, if you live here, follow police instructions, and if you have information, contact authorities. Then she added, without shifting her tone, and we will also be following up with the department regarding what viewers saw moments ago. Physical contact with a member of the press without any clear explanation. In the studio, the anchor Jordan Wells had gone quiet. Live news has an unwritten rule. You don't step on your reporter's words unless they need you. Danielle didn't need him. She needed the camera to stay on her long enough for the truth to become undeniable. Meanwhile, Maya was no longer just producing. She was mobilizing. Danielle could hear it in her ear. Maya's voice clipped, urgent, moving between channels. Clip that shove, she told someone. Pull the last 30 seconds and send it to digital. Get me a timestamp. Get me the sergeant's name. Call the desk. Tell them we may have a major development. Within 2 minutes, the station's social media account posted a short clip. The shove, Danielle's stumble, Danielle's calm narration afterward. Captioned simply, live. Reporter pushed by police supervisor during broadcast. It didn't matter that the caption was restrained. The video did the work. By 7:05 p.m., the clip had been shared by local activists, legal commentators, and other journalists who recognized the severity instantly. A shove isn't always assault in a courtroom sense, but it can be a civil rights issue, a policy violation, and a disciplinary matter all at once, especially when it happens without justification and on camera. Danielle stayed on scene for another 15 minutes, finishing her report as police cleared the building and the crowd began to disperse. Harlan kept a distance now. He didn't approach her again. That alone told the story. He knew the shove had crossed a line, and he knew crossing it twice would be catastrophic. When the station tossed back to the studio, Danielle removed her IFB and exhaled. Luis lowered the camera and looked at her. "You good?" he asked. Danielle nodded, but her hands were trembling slightly now that the moment had passed. Not from fear, from the aftershock of adrenaline and the weight of what had just happened. They got back in the van, and Danielle did what experienced reporters do when something becomes more than a story. She documented. She wrote the time down. 6:47 p.m., she wrote the location. She wrote the name, Sergeant Mark Harlan. She described the contact, open-handed shove to upper arm. She noted witnesses, crowd with phones, live broadcast viewers, station footage, Luis's raw video, and likely police body cameras. Most people, after something like that, might vent, might call a friend, might go home and try to forget. Danielle didn't. Danielle called the newsroom legal liaison and asked for the department's media policy. Then she called the union rep at the station, not because she planned to sue immediately, but because she wanted a paper trail that would survive a denial. Then she did something that made the difference between outrage and consequence. She filed a formal complaint that night, professionally written, factual, and devastatingly simple. Not an emotional rant, not an accusation-laced manifesto, a timeline, a description, a request for preservation of evidence, a request for the names of all responding officers, a request that the department retain all body camera footage, dashcam footage, radio transmissions, and supervisor notes from the incident. She also included the one thing departments hate because it removes wiggle room. She attached the video clip. At 7:32 p.m., the Cleveland Police Department's public information officer received Danielle's complaint in their inbox. At 7:40 p.m., the PIO received another email from the station's news director asking for immediate comment and confirmation that the department was investigating. At 7:55 p.m., the chief's phone rang. Chief Ellen Park had been in the job less than a year, brought in after a string of scandals to restore public trust. The city council had made it clear, no more cover-ups, no more, we'll look into it, with no results, no more pretending the public couldn't see what they were watching in HD. Chief Park watched the clip once, then she watched it again. Then she turned to her deputy chief and asked a question that sounded less like anger and more like disbelief. "That was a supervisor?" she said. The deputy chief didn't answer at first because the answer was obvious and ugly. Chief Park made two decisions within 5 minutes. First, she ordered Internal Affairs to open an expedited review and to secure all relevant footage. Second, she ordered Sergeant Harlan to be removed from field duty pending investigation. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that surprises people who've watched too many cases drag on for months. Because by 8:20 p.m., less than 2 hours after the shove, Sergeant Harlan's access to patrol operations was suspended. No street supervision, no crowd command, no authority to issue field orders. He was told to report to headquarters. When word leaked, it spread fast. People who rarely agree on anything agreed on this. The department couldn't pretend it didn't happen. They couldn't bury it. They couldn't spin it as confusion. The public had seen it. The station had the footage. The crowd had their own recordings. And every journalist in the region was now watching the department the way journalists watch a suspect who's already been caught on tape. Do you think the department moved fast because it was the right thing to do, or because it happened on live television? That's a real question, because accountability shouldn't require an audience, but too often it does. By the next morning, the department released a short statement. It didn't admit wrongdoing yet. Departments rarely do at the beginning, but it did something important. It acknowledged the incident and confirmed the suspension pending review. It also confirmed that the officer involved was a supervisor, which meant the department couldn't dismiss it as a rookie mistake. Danielle returned to work the next day with a bruise blooming faintly on her arm. More insult than injury, but visible enough to remind her body what her mind already knew. In the newsroom, people treated her differently, not with pity, with respect, because it takes a specific kind of courage to hold your ground without escalating when someone with a badge decides you're a problem. The station ran a follow-up segment that afternoon, not as revenge, but as accountability reporting. Danielle narrated it herself. She explained the basic rules. The public has a right to record in public spaces. The press has a right to gather news. Police can establish reasonable perimeters for safety, but orders must be clear, lawful, and applied consistently. She also explained something most viewers didn't know. Physical contact by an officer isn't automatically lawful just because the officer is annoyed. Many departments have strict policies about use of force, and moving someone can still qualify as force under policy language if it involves physical contact, even if it's just a shove, especially if it's unnecessary. Meanwhile, Internal Affairs did what they always do when the case is too public to ignore. They moved fast and methodically. They pulled body camera footage from the officers closest to Danielle. They pulled radio traffic. They pulled dispatch logs. They interviewed Officer Keenan, who confirmed Danielle had been behind the tape and that the shove did not appear necessary for safety. They also reviewed the department's own media guidelines, which explicitly stated that members of the press should be treated as members of the public with additional professional considerations, and that officers should avoid physical interference unless there is an immediate threat or lawful detention. The footage showed something else that made the case worse. Harlan had been told, on radio, 2 minutes before the shove that the media were permitted on the sidewalk as long as they stayed behind the tape. The instruction had been broadcast to the perimeter units. He knew, or he should have known. Either way, the shove wasn't confusion. It was choice. By midday, the clip had racked up millions of views across platforms. Legal analysts did frame-by-frame breakdowns. Journalists discussed it in staff meetings as a reminder to maintain composure under pressure. Community leaders used it in public forums as an example of why oversight matters. Public reaction split into familiar camps, but the center of gravity was clear. Many praised Danielle for staying calm and documenting it. Others asked why she didn't just move farther back immediately. Some argued she was provoking. But those arguments ran into one undeniable fact. She did move back, she did ask where to go, and she was on a public sidewalk behind the tape. The shove came first. And that's the moment the conversation stopped being about attitude and started being about conduct. Because your rights don't disappear when someone gets annoyed. They don't disappear when someone raises their voice. They don't disappear when someone wants you to be smaller. On the third day, Chief Park held a brief press conference. She didn't grandstand. She didn't smear Harlan either. She did what leaders do when they're trying to rebuild trust. She acknowledged harm, outlined process, and promised transparency. She stated that the department would not tolerate unnecessary physical contact with the public or the press, and that the incident was under formal investigation with a timeline for findings. Behind the scenes, the city's Civilian Oversight Board requested records, and the police union requested representation for Harlan. That's standard. But what wasn't standard was how quickly the consequences escalated. Because during the review, investigators discovered prior complaints. Not the kind that automatically prove guilt, but the kind that form a pattern. 2 previous incidents where Harlan had been accused of unnecessary physical intimidation. Both cases had been not sustained, which in internal investigations often means we can't prove it. But now there was proof. Suddenly, the shove wasn't a one-off. It looked like the visible tip of an iceberg. A week later, the department released its findings. The statement was longer this time. It concluded that Sergeant Harlan violated policy related to professionalism, use of force, and interactions with members of the public, including members of the press. It also concluded he failed to follow known perimeter guidelines and escalated a situation unnecessarily. The recommended discipline was severe. An extended suspension without pay, mandatory retraining, and demotion from supervisory duties pending performance review. Harlan's union appealed immediately, but the department's position didn't change. The video had removed the fog. Danielle didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat on social media. She didn't take victory laps. She did what she'd always done. She reported. She followed the process. She interviewed experts on media rights. She interviewed community members about trust and policing. And she asked the department hard questions about training, supervision, and why it took a live broadcast for immediate action. The department, under pressure, implemented changes. Not just a memo, not just reminders, but actual steps that could be measured. All patrol supervisors were required to complete a refresher course on First Amendment interactions and media relations. Officers were instructed that any physical contact with media or bystanders, outside of lawful detention or immediate safety threats, would be reviewed as potential use of force incidents. The department also established a designated media staging protocol for major scenes, so reporters could do their jobs without being treated like obstacles. After the footage went viral, other people came forward with stories about Harlan. Times they felt intimidated, times they felt disrespected, times they felt like compliance wasn't enough because the goalposts kept moving. Not every story could be proven, but together they painted a picture. When accountability only works when the camera is on, people start to wonder what happens when the camera is off. Where are they now? Danielle Brooks continued reporting, but the incident changed her in a way she didn't fully admit at first. She started training younger reporters on scene safety with a stronger emphasis on documentation and clarity. She worked with the station to create a simple field guide: what to say, what to ask, how to stay calm, how to request lawful orders, and how to preserve footage. She also began speaking at journalism schools about the reality of reporting in tense environments, especially as a Black woman. She didn't become anti-police, she became pro-accountability. There's a difference, and Danielle understood it better than most. Sergeant Mark Harlan, after an extended suspension, was removed from supervisory duties. Depending on the final outcome of union arbitration, he either accepted a demotion and transferred to an administrative role, or he chose to resign rather than return under restrictions. Either way, the career he had built as the man who could control a scene with presence alone was permanently altered by one moment of unnecessary force. Here's the bigger lesson. This story isn't just about a reporter and a sergeant. It's about power and restraint. It's about the difference between public safety and personal pride. It's about what happens when someone with authority forgets the public isn't the enemy and the press isn't a punching bag. Most people don't know their rights in detail, and some authority figures count on that. They count on people being too scared, too tired, too intimidated to question them. But when you encounter someone like Danielle, someone with experience, someone who knows how to ask clarifying questions without escalating, someone who can keep their composure while the world tries to knock it out of them, the power dynamic shifts. The uniform doesn't automatically win. The status doesn't automatically command submission. Knowledge becomes the equalizer. Now, some people online will always say Danielle should have just moved farther back and avoided the confrontation entirely. They'll argue it's safer. They'll argue it's not worth it. And yes, there's a reality here that can't be ignored. Police encounters can become dangerous, and people have been hurt for less. Danielle knew that risk. She calculated it, and she chose clarity anyway, because if the press can be physically pushed off a public sidewalk on live television with no consequence, then the next person pushed might not have a camera, and the next shove might not stop at one step. So what should you take away from Danielle's story? First, stay calm under pressure, because composure turns chaos into evidence. Second, ask clear questions like, am I being detained? And where do you want me to stand? Because clarity forces accountability. Third, document everything: time, location, names, because details survive denial. Fourth, use formal channels immediately, because outrage without process often fades, but a well-written complaint becomes part of the record. Fifth, understand that rights and safety are both real. You can assert one while respecting the other, but neither should be used as an excuse for abuse. One person, one encounter, a few seconds on live television, and a suspension within hours. That's the power of documentation. That's the importance of restraint. That's what happens when arrogance meets a camera and a professional who refuses to be rattled. Final question for you. If you were in Danielle's position, would you have handled it the same way? What would you have said in that moment? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-world accountability stories and the lessons behind them. This story matters because it's not just about one reporter. It's about every person who's been shoved aside, literally or figuratively, for daring to ask a question. It's about every systemic moment where authority confuses compliance with silence. It's about the idea that public servants are accountable to the public, even when they don't feel like it. Danielle's legacy here isn't just the suspension. It's showing millions of people what calm resistance looks like. It's showing that you can stand your ground without screaming. You can ask questions without insulting. You can protect your dignity without throwing a punch. And sometimes you can win. Call to action. Subscribe for more stories of accountability and real-world rights in action. Hit like if you believe professionalism matters on both sides of the camera. Share this video because everyone needs to see what happens when power forgets its limits. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had an encounter like this? And what's one thing you learned today that you didn't know before?